Alright, so it's been a rollercoaster week again for Destiny fans. We did finally get some communication, of course, from Bungie, which we've been desperately awaiting for some time, and I know the way they've handled the communication about what their plans are for Destiny 2 has been incredibly disappointing. And that isn't a simple complaint about a roadmap taking too long, but more specifically the fact that Shadow and Order has been pushed back less than 2 weeks from when it was supposed to actually drop, which is, yeah, not a great way of dealing with things. Shadow and Order, though, is essentially no more because Bungie have rescoped it, and while I'm sure we'll get most of the Shadow and Order content that Bungie already had planned, as they've said, they'll be adding other quality of life components to this, so we'll talk about that, and DMG gives extra insight into which rewards will be updated as Bungie bring back a bunch of historic stuff into the tiered system. So we'll cover what that looks like. As always, give me your thoughts in the comment section, and now, let's get into it. So, just in case you missed it, I'm sure most of us didn't, but Shadow and Order is undergoing large revisions and will be delayed, and Bungie is saying that the update's being changed and expanded to include sizable quality of life updates, and as a result, it will also be renamed. This update will now launch on June 9th, 2026, and will provide exact details closer to release, covering previously announced weapon tier upgrading, as well as additions like expanding tiered gear to all raid and dungeon activities, Pantheon 2.0, tier 5 stats for exotic armors, and more. So the quality of life component of this obviously is good, we can't really complain about that. But naturally, those quality of life elements are really for players who are currently still engaged in Destiny, and I don't think are going to do a lot to actually bring players back to the game, so we've got big question marks about what the content offering, the new content for Shadow and Order itself, or whatever they decide to call it, will be. Between now and then, Bungie have said they'll continue to have routine bug fixes and stability improvements, portal modifiers, Guardian Games is coming in March, and the return of a more frequent Iron Banner cadence starting in April. But they finished by saying we'll have more info on the next major update and future plans for Destiny 2 closer to launch, and they avoid the word roadmap here. For the moment, we don't really know why that is. The obvious thing is that, yeah, the plan is kind of up in the air, and a roadmap would need to outline stuff like expansion content, as well as the quality of life components. So how that will play out, we'll just have to wait and see. If we do get another expansion this year, realistically, we're probably looking at fall or beyond. Naturally, though, there is a big question mark as to whether that will actually happen. In relation to updates to tiered gear though, DMG gave some extra insights here and said the current plan is to upgrade armor across all raid and dungeon content to the tier system. Weapons from dungeons will also be tiered starting in June. As for raids, crafted variants of weapons already exist, and to elevate those while embracing the power of tiered weapons, we'll be upgrading crafted weapons and adept variants with new perks and ways to enhance columns that match that of tier 5 weapons. We'll share more details closer to launch. So in relation to that, naturally, there were questions about whether we'd be able to upgrade previously crafted or adept versions of weapons and not have to grind them again, although he did say new perks are being added. Another player suggested the possibility that they're going to modify the crafting system to allow you to slot the 3rd and 4th column perks as well as the enhanced stuff, so as to whether these will actually be tier 5 weapons isn't entirely clear, but on a sandbox level they'll essentially be up to par with tier 5 weapons, perhaps without the same visual representation, right? And so that's kind of strange in itself. Although aside from new content, this is a positive. I think one of the challenges in terms of broader Destiny 2 players is that obviously raid and dungeon content isn't necessarily the most played because it's more difficult and it requires more players. And I know there'll be comments about player counts and whether folks will actually be able to get raid teams together, right? I'd also hope that Bungie have enough of a content offering for general Destiny 2 players, solo players. Explorer mode dungeons or something would be cool, but that isn't necessarily likely at this point. So that's how those pieces of gear will be updated. I think we've got something like 18 or 20 raids and dungeons in total. So when you consider how much gear will actually become relevant again or up to the same standard as everything else we have at the moment, it is a fairly significant amount, but you'll have to let me know whether you think that's a valuable time investment for Bungie. In terms of weapon tiers being able to be upgraded as a general rule, it isn't really the most mind-blowing update for most players of D2 right now because those of us who've spent a lot of time in this current system are already pretty much at max power, so it'll be useful for some folks but not necessarily many folks. Tier 5 stats for exotic armor is good. I know, there's an argument there to say it should have already existed when Edge of Fate dropped. And then there is the Pantheon 2.0 component. It's good that Bungie have actually confirmed this part because outside of saying they had a raid and dungeon event planned, or at least an aspiration for that, Bungie hadn't confirmed anything else about it, so it's good that we're hearing about that, and I imagine that content will roll out in the weeks that actually follow this June update. Rumours a little while back had suggested that Pantheon 2.0 would focus on bringing back bosses from Scourge of the Past, Crown of Sorrow, and Spire of Stars, so of course looking at the lists of raids and dungeons that hadn't actually been vaulted, Pantheon will only really serve to expand the amount of raid and dungeon content actually relevant in D2. So it's a lot of endgame stuff that Bungie are focusing on here. Hopefully, there'll be other offerings that are broadly appealing to Destiny players, right? Things they didn't touch on here, outside of Iron Banner and Guardian games coming in March. We know of another event, Call to Arms, that Bungie had said would be mid-season around April. So I'm not sure if that's been moved back or what the deal will be there. To the bigger question though, where are we actually going here? Well, like we said at the start, it's possible that Bungie are buying themselves some time to do much bigger reworks of systems, to perhaps remove the portal entirely, and to deliver some kind of expansion content that'll be meaningful later on in 2026, or potentially even beyond that now. Bungie had announced 2 expansions, of course, for 2026 for the summer and the winter, and if 2 expansions is still the plan, I think it's very unlikely that we're going to get both of them in 2026, although it's still possible we'll get one of them later on. But I think lack of announcements about further kind of updates in the future of D2 that Bungie referred to at the end of that tweet could indeed be the wait and see part where Marathon has to perform before Sony will be willing to allow Bungie the resources to kind of finish that content. And that's why we might be looking at this particular format, right? Bungie creating something that's aimed at tiding players over for longer, given the amount of raid and dungeon content that will actually be updated at this point. Theoretically, that's enough to keep players busy for quite some time if they actually play that content. Not that I'm saying that that's better than having new stuff in D2, because obviously it isn't the same. I do seriously hope that Bungie expand on this a little bit in the near future. But in itself, it's good that Shadow and Order will essentially have a much wider scope than it was originally going to. We can't really complain about that part, but the delay is obviously very disappointing. And another big negative that will affect sentiment in the coming weeks and months is that the question mark around the future of the live service of Destiny 2, the expansion model, and any bigger content offerings remains a thing, right? It's very clear at this point that whether we're playing Marathon or not, I know many of you guys won't be, we'll have to see what happens in the launch month, right? See how that goes down through March. And then hopefully from April and beyond, we'll start to hear a lot more about what Bungie's actual plans are. But as we've said, the speculation just doesn't do anyone any favors. So let me know down in the comments section how excited you are for updates to raid and dungeon gear. As I've said, it will serve a certain part of the audience really well, but as we know, there's a bigger part of Destiny's player base that don't really engage in that kind of content. So we'll simply have to wait and see what else is on offer. In terms of what I'm going to be doing with the channel, I feel like it's really difficult to move from Destiny to one other title, right? Or even a couple of titles where Destiny players have a lot of interest. And that makes things challenging because Destiny has kind of pulled in different types of players from various different types of games. So when you remove Destiny from the equation, it doesn't feel like there is one big thing that a lot of Destiny players are likely to kind of gravitate towards again. And that makes it difficult to choose other core titles. I kind of see myself, or one of the biggest opportunities for me, based on the kind of content I've made over the years, is to broaden out into wider gaming news, especially in the FPS space, but to try and do it in my own way. Maybe some of that memery that we had from the meme comments videos and stuff like that. Any thoughts from you guys will be super appreciated down below, because obviously we are going to have to pivot to something. As I've said before, I will be touching on Marathon and certainly tracking its performance more than anything, because it has a big impact on Bungie and then subsequently Destiny. So if those of you who've been around for some time could stay patient with me, I'm trying to navigate this. I don't want to shove anything down people's throats that they don't want to see, but there probably will be some Marathon stuff through the launch period, and then we'll simply see how it goes. Beyond that, I think reporting on broader gaming news is probably what's going to make the most sense for me to try initially. So if you have any impressions on that, let me know in the comments. But there we go, those are the updates from Bungie. We'll see what TWID has today. I'm not holding my breath for anything major, but further clarifications around some of the content model through the spring would definitely be nice. But I know, hopium, right? Cheers for watching, my friends, and I hope you have an awesome day.